Hello, my darlings, and welcome back to another episode of Radio Wasteland, the best in paranormal. I'm your host, Chauncey Haworth. This is my co-host, Kara Kittrick.
Hello.
Kara, do you have any news for us today?
Yes, I do. So, first off, Lon Strickler over at Phantoms and Monsters and Singular Fortean reports that multiple witnesses in the Chicago area have spotted a toddler-sized bat creature galloping across the ground on its wings in a style reminiscent of vampire bats. These reports come after several years of winged humanoid sightings in the area, drawing comparison to the legendary Mothman. The question hangs in the air like some sort of convalescent bat infant. Are they breeding? Because that sounds real cute, not going to lie. Researchers in China have created chimpanzees who perform more effectively on tests by introducing human genes for intelligence in utero. Brain size was unaffected. This is not actually the first experiment along these lines, since hybrid monkey-human brains, are extremely useful for studying Alzheimer's, among other things. But this may have been the most brazen chimera experiment to date, performed in China, where questions of ethics are not usually brought into the laboratory. Finally, scientists believe they may have solved the mystery of missing ships in the Bermuda Triangle. Roughly bounded by Miami, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda, the triangle may experience rogue waves up to 1,000 feet high, according to scientists at the University of Southampton. Yes, Chauncey's eyes just bugged out, for those of you who are listening, audio only. Apparently, the possibility of multiple tropical storms coming together from different directions may be a recipe for unusual and catastrophic phenomena in water and in the air. And lastly, in lifestyle news, I made my first serious attempt with a Ouija board this weekend with a friend. We summoned a ghost who purported to have killed his mother shortly before World War I and was thrilled to get the chance to return to Earth and brag about it. The ghost said it would speak on the record, but declined to give its name. It concluded the session by laughing maniacally and threatening this reporter. Happy Halloween, I guess. Back to you, Chauncey.
All right, I'm not sure where to start with this one. Toddler-sized vampire bats. You know,
Sure.
You ever seen a fruit bat?
Yeah, flying foxes.
Yeah,
All
that thing's like toddler-sized. That thing's huge.
It is.
Yeah.
But it's not a vampire bat.
No.
Vampire bats they kind of have to be small because their whole, modus operandi is to land on mammals unnoticed.
Not anymore.
Yeah, I think I would notice a toddler-sized winged bat creature landing on my back, but,
Yeah,
you know.
totally. I mean, my kids have been sucking the life out of me for like 18 years. But, I don't know. Yeah, that's some wild business right there. But, I mean, why not,
Why not? That's where you're going with that.
Well, sure. I mean, obviously, bats can get that big. Flying foxes are bats.
Yeah, so maybe that's all it is. Maybe it's a flying fox loose in the Chicago area, which in itself would be pretty interesting. But the thing is, flying foxes don't move that way. Vampire bats have this, particular method of locomotion where they kind of spring across the ground on their wings.
Oh, really?
If you've ever seen a vampire bat run, well, first off, you'll have nightmares for a while. Like, you will require therapy if you see that, because it's terrifying.
Right.
But that's kind of what was described by these witnesses.
Huh.
No one actually saw this thing flying, so maybe someone, dressed up their dog in like a bat costume for,
It was a
for funnies.
chihuahua with a head injury halfway in a black plastic bag. That's all. Somebody help me, please.
And everyone's like, oh, God, what is that thing?
Yeah, totally. All right, the monkey apocalypse, that is exactly what went on, at least in the reboot of Planet of the Apes.
Right? Yeah, so
like,
I found the article of this, and the cover picture was obviously just a picture from the reboot Planet of the Apes.
Oh, that's funny, because we used one from the original, but that's my style.
Yeah, you've got to. So it was from, Rise of the Planet of the Apes.
Right.
The sort of prequel one where they explain how it happened.
Angry Caesar. Angry look on Caesar.
I never watched it, but yeah.
Oh, really? They're great.
Really?
Yeah, they're great.
Oh,
even the originals are great.
They look, I don't know, lame. But
Oh.
maybe I should watch it to, get a blueprint for how the next few
Yeah,
years
you don't
are
even
going
know
to
how
go.
scared you should be at this point.
No, I don't. But I read this and was like, no, that's. First of all, no one would be that stupid.
Right? Who the hell?
We've seen movies.
Right.
Like, what are they trying to do? And then I read Alzheimer's research. Okay, that's noble.
Right.
But it.
Well, I mean, if movies have taught us anything, it's we shouldn't mess with this stuff. Like in that one movie where they messed with the sharks and made them super smart by trying to cure Alzheimer's with shark brains.
Is that a movie?
Yeah. Deep Blue Sea.
Wow, okay. They were actually trying to cure Alzheimer's with shark brains?
Yeah, it's terrible. Yeah. It was worse than Megalodon. The Meg? It was worse than the Meg.
Well, that in itself is a serious violation of scientific ethics, is if they're doing anything, that could even possibly become worse than Megalodon.
Right. No, I mean worse than the movie.
No, I know.
Oh, okay. Yeah, totally.
Like, you have to think about your responsibility as a researcher.
Right, totally.
Is the apocalypse you're heading humanity towards hackneyed and awful?
Right.
You got to think about these things.
Well, I have this argument towards musicians a lot. People will be all, oh, did you see what he did on the guitar? That was amazing. And I'm all, yeah, but just because he could, really, should he have?
Exactly.
Maybe you should have, played something classy. And then finally, the Bermuda Triangle. I don't know. It doesn't explain any of the planes. I guess 1,000 feet, maybe it does.
Well, no, probably not. But rogue waves are caused by high winds.
Yeah.
So one would think that might. And they're caused not just by high winds, but by, unusual patterns of crosswinds that you don't necessarily get in most places. So it's reasonable to me that, pilots might fly in there and be like, what is happening? The plane was not built for, whatever's happening here.
And Rogue Wave is also a pretty good synthwave artist.
Oh, is it?
So
there's
that.
I was just kind of gathering that I meant the ocean phenomenon from context clues. But they could have meant the synth artist.
Right.
He's just paddling around there in a canoe with a wetsuit, just sabotaging boats, shooting down planes.
And we don't have too much more time before our interview, but how'd the... So when you did this thing, I don't know, did you get the sense that something was really going on, or were you...
Well, I don't know. I didn't feel like I was, influencing the planchette.
Do you think she was?
I don't think so. Because a lot of the answers to our questions were just gibberish.
I see.
It was just kind of meandering around, and it was not at all clear what
if she
was meant.
was, it was highly premeditated.
Yeah, but we did get some eerie answers. Like we asked, are you happy to be back on Earth? Yes. Why are you here? To grieve. Okay, that's creepy. Grieve what? My mom. And then it's like, how did your mom die? All this stuff. And then eventually we're like, okay, your mom was killed at a young age. That's terrible. Who did it? And then it was just, I.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's some stuff,
That's
man.
fun.
Yeah.
So, classic Ouija board. This was last night, so I haven't heard from my friend.
Well, nobody
yet.
goes on a Ouija board to have somebody be all, I lived to the ripe old age of 90 and died in my sleep.
Yeah, it's just like, get out of here, Gerald.
Right, yeah, nobody wants that. All right,
Put
we're
your
coming
crazy cousin on.
We're coming up on our guest here. We have an interview that Karen and I recorded earlier this week with Brien Foerster talking about ancient technology in Egypt. We had to pre-record it because he's from out of the country and out of the hemisphere, too. So come on back. You're listening to Radio Wasteland with our guest, Brien Foerster. All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland and our guest, Brien Foerster. Today we're talking about Egyptology and basically, Brien, I know you've been on the show before, but I recently saw a video with you where you were doing like a seminar about Egyptology and basically talking about the pyramids and how they were built and when they were built, and I thought it was very informative and just awesome information on that, and I was really kind of hoping to talk to you more about it so that we could elaborate on it.
Sure, sounds good. Well, there's a colossal difference between the two because the
the dynastic work, a lot of it is located in middle to southern Egypt, like around Thebes and down towards Aswan. And there you see temples like Karnak, where the dynastic aspect of it, the columns, for example, are made of stones that are stacked on top of each other, almost like Tootsie Rolls. Whereas the pre-dynastic, the columns are one solid piece of stone, and the difference in the stone is that the dynastic work tends to be limestone and sandstone, which are relatively soft, whereas the pre-dynastic tends to be granite, which is much, much harder. So it's basically night and day when you look at the structures.
Right. So, I guess one argument could be made is that that they got smart and used easier rocks. But was the granite more easily accessible, or was it further away? So I guess what I'm saying is one idea could be that close to them was the difficult rocks to work with, and then they discovered the easier ones and started bringing those in. How did that? Do you get what I'm asking?
Yeah, no, it's actually the opposite. Where you find a lot of the limestone and sandstone constructions, the quarries tend to be quite close together, or quite close to the actual sites. But when it comes to the granite's only found in two locations. One is Aswan, which is at the very southern edge of Egypt, and the other is in the Sinai Desert, which is in northern Egypt on the eastern side. So in some cases, the granite had to be moved 500 plus miles to the actual location of where the constructions were.
I see. So, yeah, and then back to my earlier question, was it a gradual, so like in the case of, I think people in South America, there seemed to be a time where the things were built and then everything was vacated and then people came back in, as opposed to a time that's sort of a gradual change. Was this the case in Egypt? Because we're seeing older structures that are built differently and newer structures that are built differently. Was there a gap in between where people weren't there, or was this a gradual change from one to the other?
No, there was an abrupt shock to both areas and other locations on the planet as well. So there's mounting evidence that there were a series of cataclysmic events that happened between 12,700 and 11,600 years ago. So we think that most of the megalithic construction, whether it's in Peru or Bolivia or Petra in Jordan or Egypt, that's all pre-cataclysmic. And then several thousand years passed where the land was actually not even habitable. And then all of a sudden you had the rise of cultures like the dynastic Egyptians in Egypt and then the Inca in Peru.
So it is like they came back in and rediscovered what was there.
Well, it was probably somebody else. The mystery is who were the megalithic builders. And of course, the conjecture is a lost civilization, possibly Atlanteans, or possibly aliens did that work. And then you had the famous civilizations come in and rise in those locations.
Right, yeah. Yeah, because that's the weirdest part to me is the gap. It's like it makes you, we're looking at a huge gap, which, is right around the Ice Age. So it makes you wonder. A big interest of mine has always been how. So for all conservative estimates, we've been humans like we are now on the planet for about 150,000 years. And so how for 140,000 years there was like nobody built a city, nobody did anything more than fire and a stick. It's like it seems like a very long time for a lot of things to happen and then go away.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And there are some that believe that these cataclysms actually happen about every 13,000 years. So there could have been many cultures that rose and didn't fall. They were collapsed over the course of time.
Right.
I mean, there are lots of cataclysms kind of like that throughout history. I'm wondering if maybe the scale is different here. as compared to something like the Minoan eruption, where, that obviously caused some cultures to fall and other cultures to rise, but it sounds like this is on a much more massive scale.
Yeah, like global, as in something came into our solar system and created like throughout the solar system, finally impacting our planet and absolutely decimating the environment.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's frustrating that I'm sure your line of work is frustrating, that knowing that you're going in and looking at things that are slowly going away, and once they're gone, they become exponentially more difficult to explain. The archaeology and history in general, especially history, prehistory, before really sort of good notes were taken. It becomes, every day that passes, it seems like it becomes more difficult to explain, other than the rise of technology, of course.
Well, the great thing is that more and more sites are being discovered thanks to new technology like LiDAR, which can penetrate rainforests and things like that. So there is the potential of some more major discoveries. And the great thing about Egypt is the new head of the Supreme Council of Antiquities is actually opening up places that are very enigmatic and mysterious that previously were not open to the general public. So that's, in the case of Egypt, it's actually getting much, much better.
I've always been surprised about this. I think we covered this a little bit on the last show, but why are Egyptologists so closed to new ideas? Is it that they're so closely associated with what they would deem as crackpot theories? Or is it because they're so ingrained in the money that they're making, or because somebody is shutting them down? I don't really understand why a scientist or why a historian or why any of these people would sort of shut down new ideas or these anomalous concepts. I don't understand why they would do it.
Well, the difficulty is that they base their entire careers and also the people who they learn from on a certain paradigm, and it's difficult for them to break themselves away from that. But what's good is now we're getting more into multidisciplinary approaches at looking at these ancient megalithic sites. So we have geologists who come, we have engineers and architects and even stonemasons who come, and they look at the megalithic structures, and I haven't had one person be able to state that, for example, that the dynastic Egyptians could have built the Great Pyramid, or that the megalithic work we see in and around Cusco, Peru, could have been made by the Inca. So that's a very positive thing that's going on. And I think the younger academics are more open-minded to looking at actually what is the hard science of what it is we're studying.
Yeah, I would guess that the younger academics being more open-minded to this stems from the way that they're learning, where it's not so necessarily hands-on with a specific teacher, but maybe more so internet technology-driven, where they don't make these necessary associations to the mouth that it's coming from.
Or just because they're a new generation and they don't have the ingrained ideas. I think it was Max Planck who said science advances one funeral at a time, and he said that in like the 20s or something. I mean, I'm serious.
I totally agree with you.
The older people are bad at learning things. The older generation has its ideas, and eventually they die out, and the younger generation is, willing and perhaps eager to embrace new ideas.
Yeah, no,
I'm guessing. I have no idea what I'm talking about, but
no, I think that's probably pretty accurate. What's your take, Brian?
Yeah, no, very true. Because the internet is a very recent development, and on it you have YouTube, where it's not just me making videos. Now it's I know a number of different people who are researching the same locations that I go to, and they're all coming up with the same explanation and answer that these things are very mysterious. They require very advanced technology to build, and therefore the cultures attributed to their construction could not have done it, and they simply inherited what it is that they found.
All right, well, that's a good segue. We're coming up on our first break. You're listening to Radio Wasteland. When we come back, I want to talk about some of these technologies and what makes us convinced either that they are or are not more advanced than what we're thinking. You're listening to Brien Foerster here on Radio Wasteland. All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland and our guest Brien Foerster. We are talking about Egyptology. We're talking about Egypt in general, mainly the pyramids and the technologies behind them. Carrie, you had a question?
Yeah, you just said something really interesting last segment. You said that the cataclysm was, not just confined to Earth, but throughout the solar system, if I'm understanding that right. Do we have evidence of, similar cataclysms on other planets, or how does that work? Because this is the first I've heard of it. It's amazing.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I think as far as I know, Venus is actually rotating backwards, which makes sense because, in the creation of the solar system, everything should be, once the balance occurred with the planets, then everything should be rotating in a very similar pattern. I think the planet Uranus is rotating on its side.
Yeah,
and then of course you have you also have the asteroid belt, which probably was a planet that could have been hit directly by this force that came from outside the solar system.
Wow.
and they're suggesting that happened so recent in the past as potentially 12,000 years ago.
Yeah, but between 12,700 and one event like you see in a movie, it was like more than 1,000 years of this disruption that happened.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it absolutely is amazing. All right, let's talk about a little bit about the technology. So it seems, there's a lot of science that when it's shown to me, I look at it and I say, well, it's obviously this. But, in a world of people who believe in flat Earth, obviously science, what we see with our eyes isn't enough, because a lot of the time they walk out their front door and say, "Duh, the Earth is flat." So I look at the machine marks on these things, and when it's pointed out to me by a person like you, I look at it and go, yeah, that looks like it was done with a machine. But I'm also know nothing about rocks or machines for the most part. So it's like, what really convinces us that this was machine marking and not one hell of a chisel?
Well, let's see. Actually, a lot of my knowledge is based on the work of engineers and machinists who have looked at the actual cutting marks, and all of them have stated that it had to have been done, especially in Egypt, where it's the most obvious, with machines. So we see circular saw marks, we see straight saw marks, we see drill holes all over the place, all in very hard stone like basalt and granite, which would require at a minimum diamond level technology, and that wasn't invented until the 1860s. So people keep coming up with this recurring thing that the Egyptians had copper tubes and they used probably silica sand or something like that in order to do it, but the penetration rate in the case of the drill holes and some of the saw marks is 500 times more efficient than what we have today.
Oh, yeah, that is absolutely...
That's pretty mind-boggling.
It is mind-boggling, and I find the whole of it really quite... One thing that confuses me is over the years we've seen the large megalithic stones and what you had referred to as pillowing. And sometimes I see this and I think, okay, well, maybe that's erosion that made a pillow like that. Or in other things, people are trying to say that it was somehow melted. that way. In the case of Egypt and the pyramids, what is this pillowing and what are we seeing there?
Well, we don't really see the the pillowing that much in Egypt. The temple, which is close to the Great Pyramid, is somewhat polygonal in nature, and again, it's granite. It's a very hard stone, and multi-ton blocks. Again, having to have come from the Aswan quarry, which is like 500 miles away. But it's more in Peru where we see the real polygonal, which means multiple angle stone, and it does look like marshmallows pushed together. Every stone is a different shape and size, and each one interlocks with the other. It's a three-dimensional interlocking of the stone. They're not simply stacked on top of each other. So that's technology easily beyond our capability, because you just look at it and you go, this is crazy how this was done. Why would you bother to do it? But obviously, whoever did the work, that was the level of their technical capability, and they decided that's how we're going to, this is how we build.
Well, so, that raises a good question, because
go ahead.
Okay. Why would they bother to do any of this? Like, the people with this advanced technology, what are we thinking for that?
Yeah, well, the polygonal walls especially the ones in Peru, every stone is a different shape and size, and they three-dimensionally interlock with each other. So that would obviously, the standard answer is, well, the Inca did that because it made it earthquake-proof, but it's probably far more complicated than that. The Inca couldn't have done the work because they couldn't work in granite, and because they were a Bronze Age culture, and you need at least very hardened tool steel to work with granite at all. But if you had machines, it would be even better. And the other thing is that that's what makes Peru more complicated than Egypt, because in Egypt we see the saw marks and drill holes and things like that, but in Peru we see almost no tool marks whatsoever. So it's like they were able to make the stone like marshmallow-like material and basically push the stones together. So that's why there's no gaps in between, except for later earthquakes that did partially damage some of the structures.
Now here's something I don't totally understand. So like, these people have the technology to do these amazing things with stone that we can't do, but they didn't add climate control or glass windows or a power source or solar panels or anything like that to these structures. So were these structures sort of decorative structures, or would that stuff not have survived? Like, what's the thinking there?
Well, that's the intriguing thing. What happens is that when you have a structure that's made of solid stone like that, where all the pieces interlock with one another, it probably creates a different vibration or energy inside the structure itself. So that tells you that the structures were used for some kind of vibratory or energetic purpose originally, and then later were adopted by the cultures like the Inca for ceremonial purposes. So that's still something that we're working on, as to what was the original function of these amazing works that we see.
Yeah.
So over the years, we've seen things that have basically tried to say that the pyramids were generating energy, some sort of power source or something like that. Is there anything backing that other than sort of science fiction wishful thinking?
Not really. When you when you look at the megalithic works in Egypt, like the Great Pyramid system, of which there are basically 8 of them, the original pyramids that were constructed. Then later you see the dynastic people making pyramids out of mud bricks, so the whole technology has gone backwards. And then you have the obelisks. And the obelisks, again, each one is one single piece of granite stone. The largest one that was never completed would have been 1,200 tons. It's still in the quarry in Aswan. So the belief that I have, and some others have is that the the Great Pyramid system were creating energy of some kind. I don't think it was electricity necessarily, but some kind of vibrational energy, and they were the transmitters, and then the obelisks were strategically set up in very specific locations as the receiving stations.
But this is beyond us even understanding how that would potentially work. This is us just reverse engineering something that's... or do we have any parallels today that would be associated with this?
Well, Wi-Fi would be a very simple example of that. I think this was Wi-Fi vibrational technology on a very industrial kind of scale.
I see.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So, before we come to the end of talking about the Egypt portion of this, what's your take? A lot of people going towards aliens, that's a popular one. Going towards ancient technologies, or even lost, more recent technologies. What's your take? Or do you have one? Do you try to avoid a take?
Well, I'm actually, honestly, it depends on the location again. In the case of Egypt, I'm looking more and more towards it being an alien construction of some kind. But then in Peru, with the polygonal, almost playful looking form of construction, that looks much more human to me. So I believe there are at least 2 or 3 different very advanced civilizations that were doing constructions in different parts of the world. We also have a place called Pumapunku in the highlands of Bolivia, and that's completely different in the way that it was built. And it again looks like it was hit by a very massive series of cataclysms, because the stones were literally thrown off in different directions.
Wow. All right, you've been listening to Brien Foerster here on Radio Wasteland. Come on back, we got some more. All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland with our guest Brien Foerster. We're talking about, we were talking about Egypt, and we were talking about ancient civilizations, so on and so forth. But now I want to talk to you a little bit about coming back from Turkey, because it's interesting, all these comparative ancient civilizations, when you look back, ultimately, for anybody who believes in evolution, we all came from one. Sure. So, of course, the further back you go, the more connected you are. But I find it really interesting when we go back and we start to see these similarities. So what were you doing in Turkey?
Well, Turkey was actually a tour. We had 25 guests with us. And the main thing was to look at the ancient sites. The most famous one,
Petra, of course,
that's in the news now is called Göbekli Tepe. And it's a series of very tall T-shaped pillars. They began excavations in the 1990s, and they've been able to carbon date it back to 11,500 years ago. So it's the main thing that it shows us is that advanced communities, or at least society, had to exist at that time to do a construction of that nature. So that means that they had to have had agriculture and probably animal husbandry. So that makes civilized society go back twice as far as was previously thought, because previously it was thought that the Sumerians and the Egyptians were the oldest cohesive civilizations, but Göbekli Tepe says it's older. In terms of the way it was built, it's actually kind of crude, but there is another location called Hattusha that we went to, and I was very surprised to see that it's megalithic in nature. It was the center of the Hittites, I think 3,500 years ago. But again, I saw lots and lots of examples of very advanced high technology being involved in its construction.
In the case of Göbekli Tepe, where it's really sort of so old that it reset what mainstream archaeology was thinking about how old civilization was, this is a loose understanding that I've grabbed from things. Doesn't it butt right up against the Ice Age and sort of leave us with the impression that it probably went, that society must have gone on before the Ice Age for them to do this? Or because it seems like the timing is pretty close.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. Again, a number of scientists and other researchers are finding more and more evidence of this series of cataclysms that happened from 12,700 to 11,600 years ago. And so if Göbekli Tepe is 11,500 years ago, it means it was built just after the end of all of these cataclysmic events.
That brings me back to Egypt and the time frames. One thing in your lecture that I was seeing was that you were talking about how fast they would have had to have moved the megalithic stones to build the pyramids in order to have it built in the time frame that modern archaeology thinks that it was built in.
Right.
Can you explain that to us again? I found that to be somewhat mind-blowing.
Well, it is, and again, it's an ongoing study. I saw a video recently by, I believe, a German team of geologists who took samples from the Great Pyramid and then compared them to the Giza Plateau, which is all limestone, and then they compared as well with 3 different quarries located in Cairo, which is across the Nile River, and they believe that almost all of the limestone of the Great Pyramid came from Cairo. So that means not only did you have to cut and move 2,300,000 to 2,500,000 multi-ton blocks and put them into place with a very tight fit, but now you have to add in the fact that each one of those stones had to cross the Nile. And so if the Great Pyramid itself was built in 25 years, which is the consensus more or less, that means every stone would have to be cut, moved across the Nile, moved onto the Giza Plateau, and be set into place every 2 minutes.
Wow. And that was the mind-blowing thing for me, because, that's a lot of people.
It's simply impossible. I mean, how many barges would you have to have on the Nile to be able to move these back and forth? And it would take you probably half an hour to move a barge from one side of the Nile to the other. So, cutting and setting into place with precision in 2 minutes is impossible by standard methods.
All right, Brian. Well, we're coming up on the end of the show here. I guess you have some tours coming up. What tours you got coming up?
Well, we have our annual tour of Egypt in March, and then right after that, we're going to study megalithic aspects in Jerusalem and Israel, which are relatively recent discoveries. And then in June and August and November, we're doing major tours of Peru and Bolivia. And also I'll be at a UFO conference in Laughlin, Nevada in February, and Contact in the Desert in Indian Wells, California in late May, early June.
Sounds great. And where can our listeners find out more about you?
Everything is on my website, which is hiddenincatours.com.
All right. And then, our conversation here has prompted some other stuff. So next time you got some free time, I would love to have you on again because, it was in the news here in the past year or two. They keep trying to find more pyramids sort of hidden
in the jungle.
In jungles,
yeah.
And under, what is it, Bolivia or something? They're saying that a mountain is actually a pyramid. I would just love to have you on to talk about
some recent discoveries.
Yeah, recent discoveries and really why pyramids across the board or something like that.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot there.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Brian, for being on the show. You've been listening to Brien Foerster here on Radio Wasteland. Check us out next time.
All right. right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland. We just got done listening to our guest, Brien Foerster. What'd you think there?
I think that every time anyone implies that, like, advanced human civilization goes back further than 10,000 years, this light comes on in your eyes, and I'm worried it's going to blind me. Or it's disturbing. It's like the gleam of a mad prospector discovering gold.
Right. We need a name for the shows where we're our own guests, because the one I'm working on now is Antarctica.
Is Antarctica. Okay.
You know, about...
What's paranormal about Antarctica?
Well, I have a terrible memory, and I haven't done all the work yet, but there's the map, man. The map.
The map?
Yeah, okay. So there's this seafaring map.
Okay.
That's from hundreds of years before we even discovered Antarctica.
Oh.
And it maps out the coastline of Antarctica perfectly under the ice shelf. Yeah.
Under the ice shelf.
Under the ice shelf.
And how long has the ice shelf been there?
Tens of thousands of years.
Oh.
Yeah.
Now that's curious.
Right, yeah.
Curious.
Yeah, there's a few other little things like that. You know, not much, but they're
well,
there.
that in itself is highly suggestive.
Yeah. And by perfectly, I mean, you know, perfectly for a guy with a pen in 1400 it happened, you know.
Sure.
It's not like...
You mean he didn't use cutting-edge topographic software to...
Right. It's LiDAR. They did it with LiDAR. No.
Primitive LiDAR.
Yeah, he drew it on a piece of
sticks.
Animal skin or something.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, no. Anytime we got this topic, I am enthralled by it. For one, you know, I like fantasy.
Sure.
And, you know, when I was a kid, I wanted dragons, I wanted magic and stuff like that. But as I got older, I still was kind of, you know, even when you're dealing with like Conan and stuff. And there's this great old rotoscope animated film called Fire and Ice. And I don't know, there's just a lot of great prehistory stuff out there. That's even 10,000 BC was a pretty decent movie. And,
yeah, okay.
That alluded to some Atlanteans in it.
Yeah. Yeah, this interview we just heard does definitely sort of allude to a much wilder and richer and more magical human history than is commonly believed.
Right.
So
I think we need that. We all need that right now.
Yeah.
We need a more magical human history.
We need a more magical human everything.
Right. Yeah, we do. Yeah, so you know, when he was on before, at the end of the program here, we played a little clip from his first appearance.
Right.
And that was 2017.
God, we were so young back then.
We were so
We were so naive.
Right.
We had no idea what we were getting into.
Totally.
What the cost would be.
Right. Now I got like a back shed full of dog men.
Yeah.
And like you got that fan in your trunk that told you God was in the sky.
Oh, yeah. She's getting rowdy. I need to toss her some more jerky.
Right. Throw in some more dog kibble. She'll be fine. Yeah. But no, I really just, I love the topic. I think it's enthralling. He seems to be leaning towards aliens.
Sure.
And, you know, that makes sense. But
it's a useful explanation. But, you know, I think people do sometimes, like, give it more explanatory power than it kind of inherently has.
Yeah.
It's like, sure, it was aliens, but then, you know, how did they do it? How did they get here? You know, where did they come from? All that stuff, you know.
Right.
Bringing in aliens, I think, usually raises as many questions as it answers.
Right. Well, you know, when I was a kid, 20s, a bunch of us shared an apartment down in Arizona, and my friends, their brothers, Jason and Chad, were pretty drunk. And
Jason and Chad. Okay, are you going to tell me like this frat boy story thing?
These guys are definitely not frat boys, but they have a brother, Chris, too. They all have frat boy names. Yeah.
Jason, Chad, and Chris.
Yeah.
All right.
No, but they're definitely not that.
Keep going.
And they're like drunk one night, and you know they're talking about. One starts telling the other one that he's like Hitler. And
that he's like Hitler, or that he's like Hitler, man?
He's like, you're like Hitler, man, because you're so controlling and so on and so forth. And
okay.
And it basically escalated to a fight of Jason on top of Chad crying, punching him in the nose repeatedly until all of a sudden Chad made this like weird squawking noise. He went, ah, and like he busted his nose and like blood squirted out. It was like,
Right.
It was traumatizing, but needless
And that
to
was
say,
the invasion of Poland.
my point
Figuratively.
afterwards is we had a rule around the house that when arguing about things, you weren't allowed to bring up Hitler or Jesus because they were like conversation enders, you know? And so, you know, that's,
But fight starters.
yeah, bringing up Hitler or Jesus, that's where conversation ends and
Right.
fights start. And maybe that's the case with with aliens. Maybe aliens, like, you know, it's like,
Okay, wow. So
what about the
that
pyramids?
was a
What about the-
conversational detour.
Yeah.
Was it worth it?
Well, I don't know. That's
to go over there into Arizona, into the, Chad beating up Hitler story. Was it worth it?
I don't know. What else are you going to do? I mean, we're on the radio. People are here. Are you not entertained? You
God,
know?
I hope they are.
But no, it's like you're saying it's like. So I'm listening to.
I'm just like, people say it as though it explains everything. And it's like, it may genuinely be the best explanation, but you have to consider all the baggage that comes with aliens.
Yeah, well, I think so better than Jason punching out Chad. Here's maybe a better comparison. I'm listening to like the World Science Expo.
Okay.
They've put up a bunch of videos on YouTube. It's a bunch of stuff, a bunch of physicists sitting around talking nerdy. Puts me right to sleep. I love it.
Sure.
And one scientist is basically saying that he's not down with infinity, and that's not science, and you're not allowed to use infinity ever.
Okay.
And the other guy goes, well, why not? Why can't you use infinity? It's all because it's not science.
Well, it is mathematics, but go on.
And he's all, well, it can't be proven. Infinity cannot be proven. And therefore, science is all about things that can be proven. And you can't prove infinity, and therefore infinity should never be an answer to a speculative question on any level, because you can never prove the next one, because there's always the next one, and there's always the next one.
I guess I'm with him as far as that goes.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting.
What was the context of this?
About infinite universe, infinite multiverse.
Oh, okay, true. Yeah, and that is kind of the criticism people level at the infinite multiverse theory. Like, yeah, it does technically explain anything and everything. It's
Right.
just, like, you can't explain the thing that you're using to explain
Right,
it.
yeah.
Kind of by definition, you can never explain it all.
Right, but I mean, we will never prove beyond a theory the Big Bang.
Right. Well, I think I'm a brain in a nutrient bath connected to a, data tube.
You're a
Receiving.
battery for robots. Is
Exactly.
that what you're telling me?
I'm just receiving input to keep my brain stimulated and
Right.
running, just computing pi secretly, but I think I'm living.
Okay, so where all this started was he was leaning towards aliens, which,
Sure.
Don't get me wrong, I totally respect his belief, and I also don't want to put that belief on him. He was just leaning
Right.
towards it because,
Well, what are you going to do with the information we have? It's some pretty weird information, right?
yeah, I want to give humanity a lot more credit. I want to
Yeah.
I want to believe that civilizations could have risen and fallen fallen into the dust, Here's another nerdy reference. We were talking outside about my collecting GI Joes when I was younger. In the GI Joe movie, they end up going to Cobra La, where all the baddies have a technology that's plants. So it's like people say, well, civilization couldn't have risen and fallen because we would have found remnants of it, but maybe we wouldn't have.
That's what I was about to say. Funny that.
I doubt that.
Okay.
You weren't about
Not
to
in
refer-
that tone of voice, though.
You weren't going to reference G.I. Joe?
No, but I was about to bring up, like, where is all the dead civilization stuff? Where are all the gears and widgets and
Right.
silicon?
But I mean, look at Native Americans. I mean, they had advanced communications and arts and stuff like that. They just didn't have advanced buildings.
Yeah, they did.
No, I'm talking about large portions of them did not,
Okay.
And
But-
so if you take that civilization as an advanced civilization and put it back another 60,000 years, it's highly possible we would never find any of it.
I guess that's true.
And they were a fully advanced cultural civilization.
Yeah, but that's kind of a
I mean, they didn't have laser beams to carve large rocks, but, you know.
You're saying, like, if you discount the advanced parts...
No, I'm saying to discount what we think of as advanced. We're putting ourselves onto the concept of advanced. We're saying, well, if they were advanced, they would have what we have. They wouldn't have what they had. Which
well, how
might
do
be
you
different.
define advanced civilization?
The ability to cut a rock into a 200-ton brick and move it.
Well,
know,
yeah. So,
regardless of how you do it, if you do it with some crazy squid fish, you know.
I mean, the Northwest Indians with, like, long houses and stuff, they weren't doing that. But the Pueblo Indians were. That's the difference.
Well, no, I understand that. I think you're getting off point here. I'm talking about the mid-plains, living in a teepee Indians. Had they existed there 60,000 years prior, we would never know it.
That's fair.
Because their technology would have been recycled by the earth.
I guess I would just say that's not a civilization that's as advanced as, say, you know, Incans or Aztecs or Mesoamericans. I think it's on kind of a different level.
Well, it is on a kind of a different level. But that's my point, is like if you go back far enough, maybe they had levels of technology that wouldn't be around today, but that could accomplish these things. You know, like people are always trying to say vibrations or that the pyramids are some kind of Wi-Fi. I mean, if it is, you know, that's a pretty fancy rock, you know, because nobody looks at a rock now and says, man, we should plug that thing in and make Wi-Fi. But to be fair, they can plug into a potato and make a battery. So, I mean, stuff is going on. Never done a potato battery?
I'm aware of what a potato battery is. I feel like somehow, there are, like, a physicist, an anthropology professor, and, like, an engineer all in a room, and they all just started crying.
Right.
And they don't know why.
Yeah. Well,
they're just like, something terrible has happened.
No, I'm very logical and scientific. I'm not putting any of these things to say that this is what happened. I'm just saying you can't rule. If you can't rule one out, you can't.
Well, there are a lot of things you can't
prove
rule
what you
out.
don't know. You can't prove what you don't know.
You can't disprove unicorns.
You're right.
Hence the premise of our show, I guess. You can't disprove unicorns.
If you're sensitive to language out there, I'm sorry, but holy shit, Kara. You're on a paranormal show.
Yeah, I know. But that doesn't mean I
Open it up, man. Open up your mind.
Fine.
Yeah.
The unicorns are real, and they built the pyramids.
That would be wild. Unicorn centaurs. Where's the horn? You know, that's the real question.
Oh, God. What has happened to this conversation?
It's all about where's the horde. That's my next book. Where's the horde?
Oh, no.
Rise of the pyramid building unicorns.
This started somewhere terrible, and it's gone somewhere far more terrible.
All right. Well, don't let our sense of humor come down on the efforts of Brien Foerster. I found him very interesting.
Yes, it was a great interview.
Very cool, and you know,
he's a smart guy.
He is a smart guy, and he's living the life. I mean, he called us from Peru because he lives down there looking at big rocks. I mean, you know, you got to be committed.
It's true.
If you want to live around big rocks.
Yeah. Big rock life, I guess.
All right, so next time on Radio Wasteland, we've got Charles Christian.
Yes.
With weird tales.
Yes.
Now, I can't go too into this because, again, you know, we've kind of opened up a world with a studio where we're able to pre-record, and we've already recorded this show with Charles Christian. Charles is an author from England. We've had very few guests from England because of the timing, but this has created the situation where we can. And Charles is...
He brought us some tales that were sort of dark and nostalgic and just...
Yeah, nostalgic and, you know, just charming stories. I don't know. They're somewhere between, you know, remembering your youth and being terrified of your youth. You know, just
I
really
think those
awesome.
are the same thing.
Yeah, just really, really awesome, cool stories. And he's definitely from a generation where the older age of storytellers were pretty brutal on him as a child. So it is going to be a great show, great interview, and I'm already hoping to have him on again because I want to hear more of his stories.
Oh, yeah. We could have gone for a long, long time with that.
Man. To become an old storyteller and to actually be interesting, it's like everybody's dream, you know. I know so many people that totally wish they were him, but they're not.
I think by the time you reach 60, you can just assume that you're interesting. It may not be true at all.
Right.
But that seems to be the ethos. At a certain point, you're just like,
Right. Well,
I'm just going to say what I want to say.
Yeah, most of the time, like, old storytelling is like Abe Simpson off the Simpsons, where
Exactly.
he's just all, oh, yeah, and we wore an onion on our belt, which was the style at the time. You know, it's like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
But this interview with Charles Christian is absolutely awesome, fun, and really kind of what I got into this stuff for. This sort of on the ghostly paranormal side, it's the stuff I like. It's when I was a kid and would go to the library or the little book fairs and stuff, I always bought the collections of ghost stories. That's what I always bought, the anthologies of ghost stories. And
this was very like that. It was very spooky stories to tell in the dark.
Yeah,
kinda.
yeah, and just
yeah.
But there's something about the old factor to them, you know, about the old country.
Yes.
What's your ethnicity?
I'm just a ton of things, but none of them like further south in latitude than say Serbia.
I see. So you're kind of like
I'm just a Euro mutt.
Mutt. I like that.
Mutt. I'm just Norwegian and Ukrainian and British and German and Irish, and I think that's pretty much it. But that's
I think
plenty.
Terry's grandma used to tell her that she was French and German and Dutch, and that doesn't mean much. And that's the answer that she would get.
That's about right. I mean, the last first-generation immigrant in my family was like before 1900, so it's it's all mixed together.
I'm adopted, so my family is very English.
Mm-hmm.
Hence my name, Chauncey Haworth, very English name.
Indeed.
And so my family that I'm adopted into is I'm the 13th generation of Haworths in America. But if my adoption paperwork is to be believed, I'm 75% Scottish.
Scottish,
and,
okay.
The rest is, German or something.
Is miscellaneous.
Yeah. Is Euro leftovers.
European and European byproducts.
Yeah. So that's we're a diverse cast. A diverse cast of characters.
A diverse cast of Northern Europeans.
Right, yeah. Well, it's like, why not, They all got different countries over there. They all got weird stuff going on.
That is true.
Can you look at a Frenchman and tell he's a Frenchman over a Belgian person?
Well, I can't, but...
Can the French?
Probably.
Really?
I think so. I think it's like gaydar, but with French.
Oh, awesome. You're probably right. Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah. That reminds me, one time I'm sitting at the gay bar here in town. This is totally off topic. I'm sitting at the gay bar in town here, and I'm talking to this guy, and we're having some conversation about something we're watching. I don't know, typical conversation.
As you do.
And then he's like, crosses his legs and leans in close, and he's all, so you're not gay at all, are you? And I'm all, I could be. And he's all, no, you're not. I'm all, all right, no, I'm not. So he had reverse gaydar.
Reverse gaydar. That's impressive. Straight dar.
Right, LiDAR. Back to LiDAR. I wasn't lying, no.
No.
All right, so you've been listening to Radio Wasteland. Next week, Charles Christian, weird tales, great old ghost stories, awesome stuff. Check us out then, and until then, do something else.